All right, so you're thinking about really locking down your credit, huh? With like a freeze or a lock.
Yeah.
And that's awesome. I mean, it's like a security system for your financial identity.
Yeah, for sure.
And we are diving deep, into articles from Experian,
Oh, wow.
TransUnion, and Equifax to try to help you kind of pick the best protection for your situation.
Yeah, it's definitely smart to be proactive these days,
Good.
especially with identity theft, on the rise.
Right.
So we'll unpack the pros and cons of each of these options so you can feel confident, about your choice.
So first things first, let's just make sure we're all on the same page here.
Okay.
What exactly are credit freezes and locks, and how do they work? I
Yeah.
get that they help prevent identity theft, but I'm always curious about the specifics.
Yeah, so both essentially block access to your credit report,
Okay.
which makes it a lot harder for someone to open new accounts in your name.
Right.
So imagine someone is trying to open a credit card
Mm.
with your info. Freeze or lock in place, they're going to get denied.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yep.
But how are they different?
Right.
It seems like everyone's always talking about freezes being free,
Uh-huh.
but locks have some advantages too, right?
You're right. There are some key differences to consider.
Yeah.
The most obvious one is cost.
Yeah.
A credit freeze is totally free thanks to federal law,
Right.
whereas a lock is typically part of a paid credit monitoring service.
Okay.
And those can run you anywhere from a few dollars to, over $20 a month.
Wow. Yeah, that adds up. So over a year, a lock could cost hundreds more than a freeze.
Exactly.
So if someone's on a budget, that's a big factor.
Absolutely. That's definitely something to keep in mind.
Okay.
But locks do offer some, tempting features.
Yeah.
For instance, many of them come with instant on-off switching via apps,
Oh.
which can be super handy if you're, frequently applying for credit.
Ah, I can see how that would be useful.
Yeah.
So with a freeze, you have to like thaw your report every time, which can take a few days, right?
Right. You'd need to contact each credit bureau individually
Okay.
and lift the freeze either temporarily or permanently.
Right.
It's not difficult, especially with, online options these days,
Yeah.
but it does take a bit more planning than a lock.
Okay, so a lock is quicker, but a freeze is free.
Yep.
Are there any other big differences we should be aware of?
Another difference is the extra features that you often get with a lock,
Uh-huh.
like dark web monitoring.
Oh, wow.
That's where stolen personal data often ends up.
Right.
So having a service that kind of scans for your info there
Mm-hmm.
can provide some extra peace of mind.
Yeah.
Some even include identity theft insurance,
Oh, really?
which can help cover expenses if you do become a victim.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So it's like a trade-off freeze is like the budget-friendly basic protection,
Right.
and a lock offers more like bells and whistles for a price.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
like choosing between, simple deadbolt for your front door or a fancy security system with motion sensors and cameras.
Right, right. Okay, I'm starting to get the picture.
Good.
So based on this initial comparison, when might someone prefer a credit freeze?
Okay.
And when might a lock be the better choice?
Well, if you're on a tight budget and don't plan on applying for anything new anytime soon,
Yeah.
a freeze is a great option.
Yeah.
It's simple,
Yeah.
effective, and completely free.
Plus, it's federally mandated, so it's a solid protection.
Exactly.
That's good to know.
On the other hand, if you value convenience,
Right.
those quick, lock unlock features can be a game changer,
Yeah.
especially if you're someone who regularly applies for credit cards or loans.
Right. I can see how waiting for a thaw could be frustrating if you're trying to close on a mortgage or snag a good deal on a car loan.
Exactly.
Speed definitely matters in those situations.
Yeah, and if you're really concerned about identity theft and want that extra protection of dark web monitoring and identity theft insurance,
Mm-hmm.
those lock features could be worth the cost.
Yeah, it sounds like both options have their pros and cons.
For sure.
And the best choice really depends on your individual needs and priorities.
Absolutely. And there's one more thing we should touch on.
Okay.
Neither a freeze nor a lock is a silver bullet.
Oh, that's interesting.
They both have limitations.
Okay, so even with one of these in place, my credit isn't like totally invulnerable?
Unfortunately not.
Okay.
Neither option prevents fraud on your existing accounts.
Okay.
So if someone gets hold of your credit card number or online banking login,
Uh,
a freeze or lock won't help in that situation.
okay. So it's more about preventing new accounts from being opened, not protecting the ones I already have?
Right? It's like having a security system for your house.
Uh-huh.
It might deter burglars, but it won't stop someone from stealing your mail or phishing for your bank details online.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So what are some other things that freezes and locks don't cover?
They also won't stop you from receiving those pesky pre-screened credit card offers in the mail.
Oh, yeah.
You'd have to opt out of those separately.
Oh, that makes sense. I remember opting out of those years ago. It seemed like I was getting a new offer every day.
I know.
It was crazy.
And here's another thing to consider.
Okay.
Even with a freeze or lock in place,
Uh-huh.
some entities can still access your credit report legally.
Oh, like who?
Yeah.
So would someone be like snooping around my credit without my knowledge?
Not exactly snooping,
Okay.
but certain entities have legitimate reasons to access your report.
Uh-huh.
For example, your current creditors can still check your credit to manage, your existing accounts.
Okay. That seems reasonable. They need to make sure I'm still creditworthy, right?
Right, exactly.
What about potential employers or landlords?
Yeah.
Can they see my credit report even with a freeze or lock?
Yes, they can access your report if you've given them permission.
Okay.
They'll typically do what's called a soft inquiry, which doesn't hurt your credit score.
Okay.
They want to see how you handle your finances, which can be, relevant to employment or rental decisions.
That makes sense. So it's not like a freeze or a lock makes my credit report completely invisible.
Right.
There are still legitimate reasons for certain entities to access it.
Exactly. It's more about preventing that unauthorized access and, adding that extra layer of security.
Okay, that clarifies things.
Good.
So we've got a good grasp on the basics now.
Okay.
What freezes and locks are,
Yeah.
the key differences, and some of their limitations.
Right.
But before we jump into like specific scenarios and recommendations, I'm really curious about those soft inquiries you mentioned.
Great question.
Yeah.
That's actually a really important distinction to understand when we're talking about credit reports.
All right, let's dig into that then. I'm all ears.
Okay. So there are two main types of inquiries that show up on your credit report,
Okay.
soft and hard.
Okay.
Soft inquiries are like a sneak peek at your credit.
Uh-huh.
They don't impact your score in any way.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
So those background checks from employers or landlords, those fall under soft inquiries.
Exactly. And when you check your own credit report,
Okay.
that's also a soft inquiry.
Oh, okay.
It's good practice to check your report, at least once a year
Yeah.
to make sure everything looks accurate.
I've heard that before, but honestly, I always get a little nervous checking my own credit.
Really?
Like, what if just looking at it makes my score go down?
Don't worry. That's a common misconception.
Oh, okay.
Checking your own report is always a soft inquiry, so it never hurts your score.
That's a relief. So what about those hard inquiries then?
Right.
What makes them different?
So hard inquiries happen when you apply for new credit,
Oh,
like a credit card loan or a mortgage.
Uh-huh.
These inquiries can ding your score a few points
Oh.
because they indicate that you're actively seeking to take on more debt.
Okay, that makes sense. So if I'm trying to improve my credit score, it's probably wise to be mindful of how many hard inquiries I'm racking up.
Exactly. It's all about finding that right balance.
Right.
It's not necessarily bad to have hard inquiries on your report,
Right.
especially if they're for good reasons, like getting a mortgage on your dream home.
Right.
It's just something to be aware of.
Okay, back to freezes and locks for a minute.
Yeah.
This might seem obvious, but
Yeah.
let me just double check.
Okay.
A freeze or a lock won't prevent those soft inquiries from happening, right?
You're absolutely right.
Okay.
Freezes and locks primarily protect against unauthorized hard inquiries.
Okay.
Those attempts to open new credit accounts in your name,
Uh-huh.
they don't block those legitimate soft inquiries we've been discussing.
Okay, that clarifies things.
Good.
So let's say I'm convinced that I need to add a layer of protection to my credit.
Okay.
How do I actually go about setting up a credit freeze or a lock?
It's surprisingly straightforward.
Okay.
For a credit freeze, you'll need to contact each of the three major credit bureaus individually.
Okay.
Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax.
Wait, 3 separate places?
Yeah,
That sounds a bit like a hassle.
it can feel a bit repetitive,
Yeah.
but luckily you can do it all online. Each bureau has a website where you can initiate a freeze.
Oh, wow.
You'll just need to provide some basic personal information to verify your identity, like your social security number and date of birth.
Okay, that sounds manageable.
Yeah.
Once the freeze is in place, how do I thaw it if I need to apply for credit?
Right.
Is that a complicated process?
It's actually much easier than you might think.
Okay.
You can typically unfreeze your credit online, by phone, or even by mail.
Okay, so I've got options. Is there anything else I should know about thawing a freeze?
Yes, there are two types of thaws you can choose from,
Okay.
permanent and temporary.
Okay.
A permanent thaw removes the freeze indefinitely,
Right.
while a temporary thaw allows you to specify a time frame for the freeze to be lifted, like a few days or a week.
That temporary thaw option seems super useful.
Yeah.
Like if I'm shopping around for a car loan and need multiple lenders to check my credit,
Right.
I wouldn't have to keep thawing and refreezing my report over and over again.
Right.
Exactly. It streamlines the process and saves you time and hassle.
Okay, so freezing and thawing seems pretty straightforward.
Yep.
What about credit locks?
Okay.
How do I set those up?
The process for setting up a lock is usually much more streamlined.
Right.
Because you're typically dealing with a single credit monitoring service rather than 3 separate bureaus.
So I'd sign up for their service, and that would include the credit lock feature.
Exactly. Most services allow you to manage your lock directly through their website or app.
Okay.
You can often lock and unlock your credit with just a few clicks or taps on your phone.
Wow, that's super convenient.
Yeah, it is.
But of course, I'd be paying a monthly fee for that convenience.
That's right. So it really boils down to whether that convenience and those extra features are worth the cost to you.
Okay. I think I'm starting to get a feel for how these tools work
Okay.
and the key factors to consider when choosing between them.
Right.
I bet some of our listeners are probably wondering when it makes sense to actually use a freeze versus a lock.
Yeah, for sure. Can we dive into some specific scenarios?
Absolutely. Let's walk through a few examples to see how these tools could play out in real life.
Perfect. Let's start with credit freezes.
Okay.
In what kind of situations would a freeze be the most sensible choice?
Well, imagine someone who's super cautious about their credit
Mm-hmm.
and not planning to apply for anything new anytime soon.
Okay.
They might be debt-free, have all the credit cards they need, and are just looking for a simple, free way to add an extra layer of protection.
Okay, that makes sense. They're essentially putting their credit on lockdown because they know they won't need it.
Exactly. And another common use case is for children.
Oh.
Freezing a child's credit can be incredibly valuable
Yeah.
because it prevents identity thieves from using their Social Security number to open accounts before they even have a credit history.
Wow, I hadn't really thought about that, but it's so important.
Yeah.
It's like protecting their financial future before it even begins.
Right, and it's a proactive step that can save them a lot of headaches down the road.
Okay, so freezes make sense for people who aren't actively using their credit
Right.
and for protecting children from identity theft.
Yep.
What about credit locks?
Okay.
When would those be the better choice?
Locks are a great option for people who need more flexibility and convenience.
Okay.
Like someone who's actively shopping for a mortgage or a car loan,
Mm-hmm.
they'll likely need multiple lenders to check their credit.
Right.
And a lock allows them to quickly toggle access on and off without having to wait for a thaw.
Ah, I see how that would be helpful. In those situations, time is often of the essence.
Right.
And a freeze could potentially slow things down.
Exactly. And those extra features that often come with locks,
Right.
like dark web monitoring and identity theft insurance,
Yeah.
can be very appealing to someone who's particularly concerned about identity theft.
Right. That peace of mind could be worth the cost for some people.
Exactly.
So it sounds like the best option really depends on your individual circumstances and priorities.
Absolutely. There's no one-size-fits-all answer.
All right.
It's about finding the tool that best aligns with your needs and gives you the confidence that your credit is well protected.
This has been incredibly informative. I feel like I'm finally starting to understand the nuances of credit freezes and locks
Okay.
and how to choose the best option for my situation.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, I'm curious about something you mentioned earlier.
Okay.
Those pesky pre-screened credit card offers.
Right.
You said we have to opt out of those separately, right?
That's right. A freeze or a lock won't stop those offers from landing in your mailbox.
Okay, so how do I make them stop?
Okay.
It seems like I was getting a new offer every day at one point.
There are a couple of ways to opt out.
Okay.
You can go online to optoutprescreen.com,
Okay.
which is the official website for opting out of these offers.
Okay, that sounds easy enough. Are there any other options?
Yes, you can also opt out by phone by calling 1-8885-OPTOUT.
Okay.
You'll need to provide your Social Security number and other identifying information.
Got it. So I can choose whichever method is more convenient. Once I opt out, will those offers stop completely?
You can choose to opt out for 5 years or permanently.
Oh, that's good to know. I'm definitely opting out permanently.
Okay.
Those offers were starting to feel like junk mail.
I hear you, and opting out can actually help reduce your risk of identity theft.
Oh.
Because if someone steals your mail,
Mm-hmm.
they won't have access to those pre-approved credit offers.
That's a great point. It's another small step you can take to protect your personal information.
Exactly. Speaking of protection, I think it's worth revisiting the fact that neither a freeze nor a lock is foolproof.
Right.
It's still possible for identity thieves to find ways to access your credit even with these safeguards in place.
Right. We talked earlier about how these tools don't protect against fraud on existing accounts.
Right.
So even with a freeze or a lock, I still need to be vigilant about monitoring my accounts and reporting any suspicious activity immediately.
Absolutely. You can have the strongest lock on your door,
Uh-huh.
but if someone finds a way to pick the lock or break a window, those security measures won't help much.
Right.
It's the same with credit protection.
So it's really about having a multi-layered approach to security.
Exactly.
A freeze or a lock is an excellent first step,
Right.
but it shouldn't be the only step.
You also need to be proactive about checking your credit reports regularly, shredding sensitive documents, being wary of phishing scams, and using strong passwords for your online accounts.
Okay, so it's a combination of smart tools and smart habits.
Think of it like this.
Okay.
A freeze or a lock
Mm-hmm.
is like the alarm system for your credit.
Okay.
But you also need to be the vigilant homeowner who's paying attention to potential security risks and taking steps to prevent them.
I love that analogy. It makes it so much clearer.
Good.
So we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
We've explored the ins and outs of credit freezes and locks,
Ah.
compared their pros and cons,
Yep.
walked through how to set them up and manage them,
Right.
and discussed their limitations.
Yes.
But before we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
curious about one more thing. Is it possible to use both a fraud alert and a credit freeze or lock?
That's an excellent question. And it's something that some security experts actually recommend for maximum protection.
Really? So it's not overkill to have both?
It might seem like a lot,
Yeah.
but think of it as a double layer of defense.
Okay.
A fraud alert acts like a warning flag on your credit report,
Uh-huh.
signaling to lenders that they need to take extra steps to verify your identity before extending credit.
Okay, so it's like putting up a beware of dog sign on your credit report.
Right.
It might not stop every thief, but it makes them think twice.
Exactly. And then a freeze or a lock adds that extra layer of security by restricting access to your report altogether.
So it's like having both a guard dog and a steel vault for your credit.
That's a great way to put it. By combining a fraud alert with a freeze or a lock,
Huh?
you're essentially creating a fortress around your credit,
Right.
making it much more difficult for identity thieves to succeed.
That's reassuring. It sounds like a powerful combination for people who are really serious about protecting their credit.
Yeah.
But before we get into the details of how to set up a fraud alert,
Right.
I think it's time to take a quick break.
Sounds good.
When we come back, we'll walk through the process step by step, and then we'll wrap up our deep dive with some final thoughts and recommendations. Okay, so we're back, and I'm ready to learn how to set up one of these fraud alerts.
Okay.
Is it as simple as setting up a freeze or a lock?
It's actually even easier.
Okay.
You only need to contact one of the 3 credit bureaus,
Oh, okay.
and they're required to notify the other 2.
Oh, wow.
So it's a one-stop shop for fraud alert protection.
Wow, that's convenient.
Yeah.
So I can just pick whichever bureau I'm, most familiar with.
Right.
Do I have to do it online, or are there other options?
You've got choices. You can set up a fraud alert online, by phone, or even by mail.
Okay.
Each bureau has its own process, but they're all pretty straightforward.
Okay, so it's super accessible no matter how tech-savvy someone is. Right.
Once the alert is in place, how long does it last?
An initial fraud alert stays on your credit report for 1 year.
Okay.
After that, you can renew it if you'd like to continue the protection.
Got it. So it's not a permanent solution, but it's a simple way to add an extra layer of security,
Yeah.
especially if I'm concerned about potential identity theft.
Yeah.
This has been so helpful. I feel like I've learned so much about how to protect my credit and
Right.
make informed choices about freezes, locks, and fraud alerts.
Yeah.
Is there anything else we should touch on before we wrap up this deep dive?
I think we've covered the essentials, but it's always worth emphasizing that no security measure is foolproof.
Right.
The best approach is to be proactive and stay informed about the latest threats and best practices for protecting your personal information.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
So for our listeners who are feeling a little overwhelmed by all this information, what are the key takeaways they should remember?
Here's the bottom line.
Okay.
Be proactive.
Okay.
Don't wait until you become a victim of identity theft to take action. Right.
Take steps now to protect your credit and monitor your accounts regularly.
Okay. Be proactive. Check your accounts regularly. Got it.
Choose the right tool for your needs.
Okay.
Weigh the pros and cons of credit freezes, credit locks, and fraud alerts to determine which option best aligns with your lifestyle and security concerns.
So really consider your options.
Exactly. And it's about layers.
Okay.
No single tool is a magic bullet.
Right.
Combine smart tools with smart habits to create a multi-layered approach to security.
Those are great points. It's all about taking control of your financial well-being and empowering yourself with knowledge.
Exactly. And remember, if you're ever unsure about something or have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to the credit bureaus or a trusted financial advisor for guidance.
That's excellent advice. It's always better to ask for help than to go it alone,
For sure.
especially when it comes to something as important as your credit.
Absolutely.
Well, I think we've covered everything we set out to do today.
We have.
We've demystified credit freezes and locks, explored the ins and outs of fraud alerts, and empowered our listeners to take charge of their credit security.
It's been a pleasure diving deep into this topic with you.
Likewise.
Hopefully, our listeners are feeling more confident and informed about protecting their financial futures.
I'm sure they are. Thanks for sharing your expertise and insights, and to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Of course.
Remember, knowledge is power.
Yes.
And by staying informed, you're taking a huge step toward securing your financial well-being.